Hello, everybody. Welcome to Geezerology on YouTube. I'm Scott in South Florida. There's Bob up in Kansas City area after a week-long visit to family in Michigan, and there's Dee as usual in South St. Louis area, out in the suburbs. And all of us have we just spent a little bit of pre-taping time talking about all the rain that everybody is going through, and everybody in the country. Man, it's awfully wet these days, but we're inside and we're dry. And today we're going to talk about the 1989 Neil Young album, Freedom. Before we get to that, just I'll go around the horn. Bob, do you have anything you want to open with?
Yeah, I got a few news items. So if you'll indulge me, we'll get started on those. Do my news intro.
Have a musical introduction.
Breaking news.
Yeah. That's what we love these. We love production values. We're all in.
There you
production
go.
Values,
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't get any better than that. This is high tech. Okay, starting off, coming up in November, we're going to have the documentary series, The Beatles Get Back, which is something that we're going to be talking about here on Geezerology later. And for those of you who may not be aware of this, it's going to be on Disney Plus, directed by Peter Jackson. It utilizes over 55 hours of previously unseen footage from the '69 Let It Be sessions. So, but prior to that airing in November, Hulu is doing a 6-part documentary series called Mccartney 321, and that's going to premiere on July 16th. And it features one-on-one discussions between Paul McCartney and legendary producer Rick Rubin. And they're going to get into backstories and other details about Beatles classic hits like Come Together, In My Life, and With a Little Help from My Friends. And they're even going to play parts of unreleased music from the Beatles archive. They're also going to get into McCartney's work with Wings and as a solo artist. And so that starts, I think, July 16th, and it's going to be over six parts on Hulu. And McCartney released his most recent album in December 2020 called Mccartney Iii, and it featured songs that he wrote and completed during the lockdown. So something to look forward to if you're a Beatles fan.
So that's going to be a documentary on McCartney, not a documentary on the Beatles.
Yeah,
but of course you can't have a documentary on McCartney without discussing the Beatles, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Right. But when you first started talking about that, it sounded to me like, they did that, 10, 15 years ago with that, I guess NPR did the Beatles anthology, or maybe the BBC did it and aired on NPR. So it's like, but they still have more things from the Beatles that we've never heard before. I thought they used all that up for that anthology series.
Well, you would think so,
there was a series of like 3 double CD packages that came out, Anthology 1, Anthology 2, and Anthology 3, I remember.
Yeah, and then Hulu also has another documentary on there about the Beatles on tour, dealing with their in-person presentations, which is actually kind of interesting. So I guess we'll never stop mining the depths of Beatle memorabilia.
Yeah, Dee.
I just tag on with Bob when he mentioned the Hulu series, and I thought, the Ron Howard movie that had the blessings of Ringo and McCartney.
Right.
Wasn't that pretty much about their live, their experiences when they toured the U.S.?
Yeah, that's the one I'm referring to, by Ron Howard.
Yeah, that's been around. Okay. Yeah, that's been around for a couple of years anyway, right?
Yeah.
I have yet to watch it. That's one of those things that's on my watch list, but I haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, it has some pretty interesting stuff on it. And one thing I remember is they were talking about the sound systems that they had at some of their concerts and how primitive it was. And they had, talking about speakers that were the equivalent of something you would use at a drive-in theater to listen to the music. And then at one point that the cheering from Beatles-struck teenage girls was oftentimes so loud you couldn't even hear the music. And I think it even, if I remember correctly, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think there was even some stuff where, I can't remember if it was Lennon or what, who, said we could quit playing and nobody would even know it, because the crowd noise was so loud.
Didn't I hear Lennon say one time that there would be a couple of times where they would sing an entire song of nonsense lyrics, or a couple of times they didn't say anything, they just moved their lips because nobody ever noticed?
Yeah,
I seem to remember that. I don't know, and I don't know if that was just Lennon, being hyperbolic or not, but I do remember Lennon saying that. And I do know that at the Shea Stadium concert, I've heard that their sound system was basically the PA system that that they would use to announce lineups during baseball games and stuff. And that was a Beatles sound system at that Shea Stadium concert. A little bit before technology caught up with the with the marketplace there.
Yeah, so I don't know if they even had shows that large prior to the Beatles touring. I mean, I don't know, but
I think it was the Beatles, and they were using state-of-the-art equipment at the time, but they were playing small clubs prior to that, and all of a sudden, let's play stadiums in the U.S.
Yeah.
They were ahead of the.
They were probably the first to do a stadium concert, weren't they? I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh, yeah, I believe it.
I can't imagine who would have done that before them.
And I do know one person who attended the Beatles concert at Busch Stadium. They were a classmate of mine. I saw her at the 25th reunion, and that's what we talked about. She said, "I still have the ticket, and it's all in a."
Oh, wow.
Her aunt took her. I said, "Your aunt was her, her mother's younger sister, and she thought she'd go." Well, naturally, you're going to go see the Beatles. She was 13 years old at the time, and we talked about. I said, "Don't ever sell that." She goes, "Oh no, she's got it, preserved like the guys do with baseball cards."
Right. That would have been what, 1965, 1966? 66.
Yeah. And it was kind of a rainy night there too. So
yeah, I kind of remember that when I was a kid growing up in the St. Louis area. I remember the buzz about that, but I was a little young to be going to a stadium concert.
Yes, without adult supervision. So.
Bob, what's next?
Okay, got a little thing here about Garth Brooks again, and apparently Garth has this policy that he does not sell tickets to the first two rows of his concerts. And when he was asked why he does that, he said his simple answer was, "We got tired of people scalping them." And Brooks also added that he got tired of unenthusiastic people filling the front two rows. According to him, many of the people who bought those tickets were just looking around to see who's seeing them being at the show. So what he does now, he has a policy that he leaves the first two rows empty, and then they send, and since he does mainly these big stadiums, they send people up to the nosebleed seats and ask them, "Hey, would you like to move down to the front row?" And they just randomly pick people and let them come down and sit free in the first two rows. And and he says Garth does this because he says that if you're way up there in the nosebleeds, you want to be at the show so badly that you'll take any seat you can. So he says if he packs the first two rows with those kind of people, they're going to be really enthusiastic because, they really want to be there. So I thought that was just kind of a nice little thing that he does. And
it is
kind of worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go back in time to 1970. And the Guardian newspaper ran a story about a letter that surfaced from Hunter S. Thompson to a letter that he sent to an editor at Rolling Stone magazine in 1970. And apparently this editor had said something about Thompson not being a music fan. So Thompson wrote, "I resent your assumption that music is not my bag, because I've been arguing for the past few years that music is the new literature, that Dylan is the 1960s answer to Hemingway, and that the main voice of the 70s will be on records and videotape instead of books." And it seems that Mr. Thompson, or Dr. Thompson, I should say, was a big fan of the Grateful Dead. And he wrote, "If the Grateful Dead came to town, I'd beat my way in with an effing tire iron if necessary. I think Working Men's Dead is the heaviest thing since Highway 61 and Mr. Tambourine Man, with the possible exception of the Stones' last two albums, and the definite exception of Herbie Mann's Memphis Underground, which may be the best album cut by anybody." So Hunter went along when then listed his top 10 albums of the 1960s. And featured on this list twice is Bob Dylan. And Thompson apparently adored Dylan. And before Thompson sadly committed suicide, he instructed his wife, Anita, to send his red IBM Selectric 2 portable typewriter to Dylan. And so I thought it would be interesting to go through the top 10 list for Hunter Thompson. So his favorite albums of the 60s. Number one was Herbie Mann's Memphis Underground. Number two was Bob Dylan, Bringing It All Back Home. Number three was Bob Dylan, Highway 61 Revisited. Number four was the Grateful Dead, Working Man's Dead. Five was the Rolling Stones, Let It Bleed. Six was the self-titled album from Buffalo Springfield. Seven was Jefferson Airplane's Surrealistic Pillow. Number eight was various albums from Roland Kirk. Number nine was Miles Davis's Sketches of Spain. And then number 10 was Sandy Bull with his album called Inventions. So it appears that Dr. Thompson was a big jazz fan amongst liking rock and roll. And then, but anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting blast from the past about what the good doctor thought.
I'm not surprised he was a Grateful Dead fan. In the one book that came out many years ago, Tales of the Great Shark Hunt, it was like a collection of random articles and stuff. And he talked about the Dead and the Stones quite a bit. So, and then of course Dylan, but yeah, I'm not surprised I have 3 of the LPs that you mentioned, Bob, that were in his top 10. So anyway, I guess there's a little overlap there. But
yeah, I've got 6 of them, and I'm not a jazz fan, so I knew nothing about any of the jazz albums, and I had never heard of Sandy Bull, and I actually had to look that up. And he was a folk artist, did a lot of avant-garde type folk stuff, and I guess could play tons of instruments, but I had never heard of him. But the good doctor was much more learned than I. And I come back once again with another KISS article, and this is going to be the last one, I swear.
Thank goodness.
Yes. I'm sorry, these people are so incredible at putting out publicity, but I just thought this was interesting. It's going to be a real quick blurb. Apparently, they have a consultant called Robert Conti, and he's written a book about a memoir called My KISS Story. And anyway, he made a statement on a recent interview that he would not be surprised if that the KISS brand would eventually be sold to a big conglomerate who would keep the KISS thing going. And so I just thought it was kind of interesting that they're expecting KISS to become some kind of corporate conglomerate entity. And I don't like KISS music, don't get me wrong, but I'm just fascinated by their marketing strategies. So anyway, that's the last KISS album.
Well, their marketing strategies seems to be that let's throw as much KISS crap up against the wall and let's see what sticks.
So I'm thinking that if this happens 100 years from now, there could be a KISS band out there still performing, and as a corporate entity.
Speaking of which, have the Grateful Dead wrapped it up yet?
I hope so.
or is that San Francisco gig still going?
well, I don't think the Dead. They've after Garcia. I don't think they ever performed as the Dead. There was Phil Lesh and the rhythm guitar player that had Rat Dog, didn't they? Perform out for a while.
I was just amplifying the old Grateful Dead joke, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I'm one of those people that Grateful Dead got a couple albums I like, but overall they just bored me to death.
I've seen a couple of, you know, I've never paid a whole lot of attention to the Grateful Dead. I actually went to Kiel Auditorium, saw them in concert one time. And I was like, yeah, okay. I was there with a group of friends, you know, I had a couple of friends who were fans, and you know, it was like, okay, it wasn't good, it wasn't bad. I wasn't real enthralled by it, but I've heard just recently, I've heard a couple of people on YouTube, you know, when I'm bouncing around, when I'm going down a rabbit hole of looking at of people talking about music on YouTube. And one guy in particular I know of, the guy from Sea of Tranquility, Pete Pardo, he one of his things that he says that the image that people have of the Grateful Dead is their image on stage and their long, unending jams. And he posits that is completely different than the band that actually went into the studio and recorded albums. That they're actually, I mean, it's the same people, the same band, but if you listen to one of the Grateful Dead albums and you only know them from the things you know of that they did live, you'd be very surprised because it's so different. So maybe one day I'll explore that. But
I read an autobiography from, was it Mickey Hart, who was one of their drummers? Is that right? Yeah. Was it him? Anyway, one of their drummers wrote an autobiography. I read it, and he alluded to that in his book also, that you know, their studio sound was not at all what they did on stage.
Right.
And in fact, he's saying that rarely could they ever capture in the studio what they did on stage. And then I guess they were always pretty disappointed with their albums because they couldn't replicate what they did on stage. But yeah, they were two totally different bands, you know, from the studio to on stage. And I like Working Man's Dead and American Beauty, which were a couple of their Americana stuff. But after that, I never had any interest in them. You know, that endless noodling around, you know, it's like, you know, a song should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know, and with this endless noodling, just after a while, it's like, are you playing for me or are you playing for yourself? But they had a legion of fans, so it obviously worked for them. Anyway, that's all I've got, and I promise that'll be the last Kiss item unless Jesus himself appears at one of their concerts. So
I've got one quick note, although it's more personal. Speaking of 80s rockers, or at least they came in prominence then, I got a birthday gift from Leslie to go see George Thorogood.
really,
in late September. He's coming to River City, which is about 15 minutes from here. So, you know, it should be fun. I mean, he had some, you know, it's going to be a lot of old blues stuff amped up, but it should be just, you know, fun.
I haven't heard from George Thorogood in a long time.
I don't think he may have one or two new songs from this, but his tour was canceled last year, and I'm thinking he's got something to prove. So, and I don't know if he has the original members, but his saxophone player is a pretty key member of it, and you know, so it's going to be I drink alone, and one bourbon, and one scotch, and one beer, and who do you love?
He's 71 years old, and I'm just looking up his discography real quick to see if he's actually recorded anything recently. Well, he did a solo studio album in 2017. He did The Destroyers 2011, 2009, 2006, 2003. So they were pretty active there for a while, but nothing from them since 2011. And then he did a solo in 2017. Good for George, still out there throwing out the guitar licks. Good for him.
Out there and get bad to the bone, Dan.
Yeah.
Bad. Yeah.
And my girls, when they were little, always got a kick out of his one song where it alludes to why don't you get a haircut and be like your big brother Bob. And they always got a kick out of that.
Yeah.
The Bob reference.
Yeah, get a haircut.
Yeah.
So remember when I mentioned one more quick thing, when I mentioned a couple of 3 weeks ago about discovered that there's this British filmmaker is making a documentary about the band Sparks.
Yes.
And it's funny, and this is how YouTube and Google works, right? For 35, 40 years, I'd never heard anything from Sparks. I'd forgotten all about them, and then for some reason I stumbled upon an old Sparks video online, and I watched it. And then I went down that rabbit hole, and I found the news and the trailer on YouTube of this documentary and learned about that. So that's pretty interesting. And so I did a little bit of bouncing around and just kind of catching up on what Sparks is all about, because it just, I don't know why it grabbed my interest, but it did. But now all of a sudden I go to YouTube, I'm just getting bombarded with Sparks videos, right? But I'm happy to tell you that it's worked. Because I've become so fascinated with this band. I've listened to a couple of their albums over the last couple of weeks. I've just become fascinated by these two guys. Still hoping that the Sparks Brothers documentary turns up on streaming soon, because it's not playing on any theaters near me. But yeah, hopefully we'll get that streaming. So if any of you guys are listening, come on, throw that on Hulu or something. I would love to see that now.
It's all of the conspiracy nuts, who worry about the federal government tracking you. It's the tech companies that know every little thing about you.
Yeah. They're putting little tracking devices in the vaccines.
Exactly.
I carry mine in my pocket. I don't need to put one in my veins. Give me a break.
Yeah, exactly. It's like come on, people, wake up. Big tech knows every single thing about your life. And you're submitting to it willingly. But
okay, Neil Young. Of course, we all know Neil Young. We all know who Neil Young is. But just to set up what we're going to talk about today, I got on to Freedom. Freedom was my suggestion to talk about our series of music with quote patriotic themes, as loosely tied in as they are. And my first thought was Freedom and the song "Rockin' in the Free World" and "Rockin' in the Free World." These are 1989 releases. And "Rockin' in the Free World" is one of those songs that was like Bruce Springsteen's "Born in the USA," where it got all this, it got play and got this reputation as being this patriotic anthem. And I got, depending on your definition of the word patriotism, but this is not what a lot of people think it is if they listen to lyrics, just like "Born in the USA." Basically "Keep on Rockin' in the USA" is a litany of what Neil Young felt were real issues and problems in the country at the time that this song was written. Anyway, this album, just to give a little quick overview, Neil Young at the end of the 70s had did a string, and really throughout the 70s, but particularly as the 70s closed, he just did a string of albums that were just brilliant, were very well received, and pretty much put Neil Young into rock god status. And then 1980 came along, and after Live Rust was really the album where I really got into Neil Young. I was always kind of a fan before, but when I heard Live Rust, man, I became enthralled with this guy. And after Live Rust came out in 1979, he did not have a run of bad albums. He had a bad decade where he just and the big thing there is that his contract with Reprise ended. He signed with Geffen Records for a contract where he would get paid $1 million per album, and he had total artistic freedom on the albums that he would release. And he went on this. He just went on about 5 or 6 different stylistic tangents during the run of this contract, which pretty much took him through the 80s, and his popular career just took a bad hit. He was selling records. He would put out a record, and the album would turn up on high on the charts real quick, but their shelf life lasted about 2 weeks. They'd disappear, and Geffen was real upset, and he ended up getting sued by Geffen because he was putting out all these lousy anti-commercial albums for them. And he just basically disappeared from the public eye for a lot of years. He did stuff like the Rockabilly album with the Shocking Pinks, Everybody's Rockin', which is bad. He actually did 1 or 2 albums with Crazy Horse that weren't very good during the 70s. He did This Note's for You was his, when he returned to Reprise Records after the Geffen contract went bad. He returned in 1988 to Reprise Records, but still went off on one of these tangents and did a blues album called This Note's for You. He actually tried to use Crazy Horse on This Note's for You, but he figured out that Crazy Horse wasn't very good at playing blues, so he sacked them, and he kept Frank San Pedro, the guitar player, but hired a few other people and called them the Restless. So now we pick it up. In early 1988, Neil went on this little small tour with the Restless, and it wasn't really tied in with any of his albums, but it turned out he went on this tour because he had to raise some cash to pay his legal bills. So I went on a tour, and it just turned out, and I didn't know this at the time, I just kind of learned all this just recently as I was reading about this period in Neil Young. But Bob and I actually saw the second show on that tour in Kansas City. The first show of that tour was in St. Louis. The second night of the tour was on January, let me get the exact date here. January the 12th of 1989, we saw him in Kansas City, and it was a hell of a show. Bob and I both really liked it, and he was what we expected of Neil Young and more. I thought we both enjoyed that show. 8 days later, now just to get the timeline going, 8 days after Bob and I saw him in Kansas City was the inauguration of George H.W. Bush as the 41st president of the United States, right? And about that same time is when the Iron Curtain was starting to fall, and the Soviet Union was starting to have allow some rock and roll acts to come play in the Soviet Union. Billy Joel went there. He was the most, he turned out to be the first one to go there. Neil Young was supposed to do a tour of the Soviet Union. He was planning on it. And then right about this time, and around January of 1989, his tour of the Soviet Union got canceled, and he was really upset about that because he really wanted to go. And his guitar player at the time, Frank Sampedro, said to him, "Oh, that's okay, Neil. Just forget it." And he kind of gave him a little pep talk. He said, "That's okay. We don't need to go there. We can just keep on rocking in the free world, you know." And thus, Neil heard that line. He said, I like that line. And he asked San Pedro, "Can I use that line?" And San Pedro said, "Sure." So Neil, while they were on tour, this tour that I was just talking about, while he was on tour, he wrote this song called "Keep on Rockin' in the Free World," where he just pretty much did this litany of the things that were going on that were bad in the United States. The last verse of the song was written after George H.W. Bush's inauguration, and he lifted a couple of lines from George H.W. Bush's inauguration, 1,000 points of light, and I'll think of the other one in a minute. But anyway, it was in the last verse of the song "Rockin' in the Free World." So he tested this song out on his acoustic guitar during a couple of shows on this tour, and it worked pretty well. And what we hear on the lead track of "Freedom" is him playing the song at a live show he did in New York a little later on the tour. But then San Pedro at some point said, "Let's electrify this song." And so he did. So they put together an arrangement and put the Crazy Horse stamp on it. It wasn't Crazy Horse. It was still a band called The Restless, but it sounded like a Crazy Horse tune. And he had this song, so he decided, okay, I need to get the song out on an album. And he just had a few pieces and parts laying around. He did an EP that he released in Japan. He pulled off 3 tracks from that. He and Linda Ronstadt had been hanging around for a while, and they recorded in a recording studio, and he pulled a couple of tracks that he recorded with Linda Ronstadt, a couple tracks from here and a couple tracks from there, and he put together this album that was released in October of 1989, right at the end of this tour, called "Freedom." And lo and behold, just this pieces and parts thing that Neil Young put together just was accepted very well, got fabulous reviews, was reviewed very well. And all of a sudden, Neil Young was a force to be reckoned with again. It was the song "Freedom." And it was also actually right before the album came out in September of '89, he did a bit on Saturday Night Live. And I'm going to stop just a minute and play a little clip of that. That was Neil Young pretty much telling the world, "I'm back." That was not Crazy Horse. That was his band, The Restless. That was Frank Sampedro and a guy named Rosas as a bass player, and I forget what the drummer's name was. Actually, to be honest, that was not a clip from the Saturday Night Live broadcast. That was from the rehearsal. The actual video from the Saturday Night Live performance doesn't exist on YouTube. The only thing I could find on YouTube was the rehearsal. Anyway, I mean and then going back and researching, just reading a little bit about that video. There's a lot of people think that was one of the best musical performances ever on Saturday Night Live, September 1989. But anyway, and then a month later is when "Freedom" came out, and And Neil Young was back. He disappeared for about a decade, and with this pieced together album and that wonderful song, Neil Young was Neil Young again.
Mm.
And then ended up going on a run during the 90s that was pretty good. I know his follow-up album to that was called Ragged Glory, which was Return of Crazy Horse, and they went off into this barn he owned out in California, out in the middle of nowhere. And they set up a stage and a recording studio in this barn back away where, there were no neighbors around to complain about it. And they spent something like a week doing 2 sets a day, inviting in audiences and laying everything down. And then the album Ragged Glory was they just went through and picked out the best performances out of those 14 or 15 live sets that they did, and it was all Crazy Horse stuff like Rockin' in a Free World. There's a lot of loud guitar intros, a lot of loud guitar outros, a lot of loud guitars in the middle for bridges, solos, a lot of feedback, and it was a glorious album. That one's actually my favorite Neil Young album ever. If you've never heard that one, you must listen to it. But Freedom by Neil Young, Rockin' in the Free World was pretty much Neil's reaction to not being able to go to Russia, and he was mad at what was going on in the world. And he just had to say his piece about what was going on in the United States, what was going on with our new president. We have 1,000 points of light for the homeless man is one of my favorite lines ever in a song. We have a kinder, gentler machine gun hand. The kinder, gentler was the other George Bush line that I was trying to remember. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. Bob.
Yes, I love this album. And one thing I like about it is the variety. And you can listen to this album and really see all of Neil Young's styles, because he goes from acoustic to the grunge, and then rocking out, and so he's got all of his styles in there, and it's very political. It's obviously his reaction to the 1980s and the Reagan era, and for about 3 decades in a row there, Neil always seemed to end up the decade with some incredible album. 69, he had Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. 79, Rust Never Sleeps. 89, he comes out with Freedom. And there are some hills and valleys in the album here or there. I think it's a little overproduced in some places, but overall, I would give it at least 4, maybe 4.5 stars out of 5. And that performance for Saturday Night Live, that is just Neil at his grungiest best. And the concert that you mentioned, I remember first half of the show, it was Neil acoustic. Then they came out for the second half, and he plugged in that Black Gibson and just went crazy. And that's probably my favorite Neil, when he just starts rocking out. And, I never thought I would hear a hard rock version of On Broadway.
I was going to mention that.
And I was going to get there too on Broadway. It's a straight, not a straight up cover, but it's a fairly faithful cover, sort of Electric Neil touches on it of the Lieber Stoller song On Broadway. But then at the end, the outro is Neil Young over the closing, over the fade out, going, "Give me some crack, give me some of that crack. I want some crack." It's just fantastic. Yeah. I mean, it's just Neil Young through and through.
Yeah, and this is a really long album. It goes for well over an hour.
Right.
And you got like Crime in the City, which is what clocks in at 9 minutes. And even though it's kind of an acoustic song, it doesn't drag. And
Crime in the City was a song that apparently he'd been performing in concert for a while, and there are no, I've been able to find no recordings of it, although I've read that they exist. But sometimes he would take that song out to 20, 25 minutes in concert.
well, from what I read, before this album, Neil Young put out an EP called El Dorado, I believe it was.
Correct.
That, and Neil said he put it out just to show people that, hey, I'm still alive. But apparently it had a very limited release.
Well, it was only released in Japan and Australia.
Right. So it's really hard to find. But apparently several of the songs that wound up on Freedom were on that EP. And I think some of the songs even date back to the 70s, so some of the stuff he'd been sitting on for a while, which is probably why we're seeing all of those different Neil Young styles and, in this album. And,
there were 3 songs on this album on Freedom from that EP. It was El Dorado, On Broadway was from that EP, and one other, Don't Cry was from that EP. And then there were 2 or 3 songs also on that EP that didn't turn up on this album. But those 3 songs, Don't Cry, El Dorado, and On Broadway, were from that EP that landed on Freedom. 2 other songs on this album, Crime in the City and Someday, were actually outtakes from his previous album with the Blue Notes, This Note's for You.
Yeah. And I think it's worth also noting, that he gives us 2 versions of Rockin' in the Free World. It starts out with an acoustic version, then the album ends, with the rock version of the song. And both versions work well, but I still lean toward the rock version of it, which is the same thing he did with Rust Never Sleeps.
Yeah, with Hey Hey My My.
Yeah,
on Rust Never Sleeps album, he did that. And this isn't the first time he's released several albums that are just pieces and parts. I call them Frankenstein albums. He had a few things sitting around here, a few things sitting around there, a few things sitting around there, and all of a sudden he just put them together, and voila, you have a Neil Young album. He did that a lot.
Yeah. And well, when I was doing some of my research, to reacquaint myself with this album, I came across this one site where somebody had ranked, Neil Young albums from worst to best. And it starts out with somewhere in the 40s and it goes down to number 1. I looked at it and I was like, wow, I didn't, I know Neil's been around for a long time and has been very prolific. But the thought of him releasing that many albums, it just kind of struck me.
He released his 40th studio album last year, or in 2019 actually, Colorado, which and I hadn't listened to it before, but I listened to it this week, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. He still has it. He still has it.
Yes,
it's not peak Neil Young, but it's pretty good Neil Young.
Very prolific performer. And erratic sometimes.
Very erratic, yeah.
Yeah, I give the man props for trying, and when Neil is firing on all cylinders, I don't think there's anybody better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Dee, what's your thoughts on Freedom?
Well, between your comments and Bob, there's not a whole lot left to say. Neil Young, I'm going to use a baseball analogy here. Pardon me, Bob, but he could be the Lou Gehrig of rock and roll music. But he's recorded all these, like you say, mostly quality albums over the years. And for this particular album, he could have received the comeback player of the decade.
Right.
For that, because as you had mentioned, the 80s were not good for him. And then this album is a good snapshot of all the styles that he's capable of. Talk about versatile, hard rock, acoustic ballads, sometimes country flavored. Obviously he loves it all. And for this particular one, I think maybe in a way he, especially with Freedom, I guess he was in his earlier mid 40s when this came out, And he wanted to show, one, that Neil Young could still rock live with the best of them, including the grunge bands and some of the other iconic touring bands. And it's true. I mean, he just had all that energy on stage. Bob mentioned the varying styles, and I tend to like his ballads just as well as the hard rockers. I liked El Dorado on this. I just thought it was, at least the version I listened to. I guess it was it was a live version. It was him and the guitarist basically, and of course on Broadway. I was really interested with that he did a faithful version of George Benson's version, who did a version of the Drifters version. So,
there you go.
But, obviously he wanted to do it, but yeah, this album is sweeping. It just covers the, I guess, the genres that he loves, and there's not a song on here that I do not like. I wish I could have, seen him live, but at this point, he had been in the business about 25 years, his first, since Buffalo Springfield. And of course, he had Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but I don't think he ever did when he was touring with them, he wasn't able to really, I think, let go of his stage presence like he does with Crazy Horse. He didn't run back and forth across the stage with Stills and, Crosby in front of him. So, I think that's one reason why he left. But yeah, this album is just definitely one of his top 5 albums. I feel.
Yeah, I would put it. Yeah, I mean, obviously he's had. What did we count? Let me get a count on this. 30. How many 40 studio albums. Colorado was his 40th. Obviously, I haven't heard all of them. I've heard, I don't know if I've heard half of them. I've heard, I don't know, maybe a third of them. 13. Yeah, maybe a third of them I've actually heard, from start to finish. Out of those 13 or 14 I've heard, Freedom is probably is up there in the top 4 or 5. Good stuff. I did get to see him on the Ragged Glory tour. Ragged Glory was his follow-up to this, 1990, with Crazy Horse, the one I just described earlier. And that was in Washington, D.C. I saw him at the Cap Center. And probably the album was released in September of 1990, so I probably saw him in November or December of 1990 at the Cap Center in Washington. And that was that video clip of Keep on Rockin' in the Free World that we just saw. That was the Ragged Glory show that I saw of him. The whole show was that. It was very high energy, and that was one of my more memorable concerts, because the opening act was Sonic Distortion. Mike Neff, who was an LA punk, he was fairly popular at the time, had a breakthrough at the time. And then the second act, there was a three-act bill. The middle act was Sonic Youth. And then Neil and Crazy Horse came out and did their Ragged Glory thing. And you walked out of that show with your ears bleeding. And totally sapped of energy. Yeah. I remember one guy I went with, there was a group, about 4 or 5 of us went. And one guy I went with walked out of there. He was very, very upset because he thought this was going to be Neil Young doing, Harvest and Old Man and stuff like that. He wasn't prepared for what he saw. I'll never forget that.
So he did no acoustic set or any
No. It was all high energy, guitar drenched, feedback drenched, Crazy Horse stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, no, he did not have an acoustic guitar on that tour. He did not have a harmonica on that tour. It was just big giant amplifiers and doing a lot of feedback.
Yeah. To expand on a couple things that you said earlier, Scott, about what happened to Young in the 80s. I'm just reading here that from 1969, everybody knows this is Nowhere, through 79's Rust Never Sleeps, every album that Young put out went at least gold. And then in the 80s, nothing. And Freedom was the first album that he had to make it into the top 40 since 1982. So as Dan said, yeah, it was a tremendous comeback. Yep. And then the other thing I'd like to expand on
commercially and critically. Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, I know Neil had to fight with some politicians about using this song, on their campaigns and stuff. And I'm just still astounded how nobody apparently listens to the lyrics on these songs, right, like Born in the USA and Rockin' in the Free World. They must just zero in on the chorus and not listen to anything else.
Well, Trump played that leading up to his ride down the escalator. His ride down the escalator to the accompaniment of this song.
So either they have people who are picking music and are doing it as a subtle attack on the people, or they're just totally clueless. And the same thing, Trump using YMCA at his rallies. He's got a MAGA crowd, and Trump's up there boogieing to a song about gays hooking up at a Christian youth hostel. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. But
we have anything else on Freedom or Neil Young?
Other than don't listen to this if you're a Republican.
I don't know. I wouldn't really call this political as much. I would just call it just
socially conscious.
Yeah. It's more of a societal litany than a political litany.
Young. It is a very social conscious album. It is political. And, Young zeroes in on poverty, drug use, crime, politics, but he also still holds out hope, that things can get better. So I like that. Keep on Rockin' in a Free World is obviously very political because it does center in on, those Republican talking points. And it talks about, it deals with what the Reagan economy did to this country, and obviously centers in on George H.W. Bush's talking points and stuff. And that is the one specifically political song. The rest of it deals obviously with society's woes, and Neil was, a lot of people have done stuff about drugs. Neil was one of the few that specifically zeroed in on the crack epidemic, and what that did to the cities of this nation.
Well, the needle and the damage done.
Yeah, and he wrote that about losing one of his bandmates. Yeah.
It was one of the it was the guitar player for Crazy Horse, Danny Whitten.
Yeah.
So anyway, getting back to Colorado, which I've listened to a couple times on the last few nights, which I'm going to listen to it again because it's a good album and I want to hear more of it. And I'll probably work my way through some of these others that I've missed in the last 10 or 15 years. But supposedly, and not supposedly, he did, Neil put together a documentary about the recording of the Colorado album. I wish I could think of the title of the documentary now. I can't. I've looked for it. I can't find it anywhere. I can't find it streaming anywhere. I found a couple of trailers on YouTube for it, but I have not been able to find that documentary. Let me see if I can find the name of that real quick. So, Neil Young, Colorado documentary. It's called Mountaintop. Because the Mountaintop, because it was recorded in a studio high up in the mountains in Colorado. What happened? I heard him in an interview with Conan O'Brien. Conan O'Brien does a podcast, and I recently heard Conan O'Brien's interview with Neil Young, and he was talking about recording that album Colorado, and he said he actually brought in a bunch of oxygen tanks for his bandmates to use while they were recording that album, because he said, he said you're up there recording, you're using all this energy, and then when you're finished, all of a sudden you can't breathe because because it's just so he actually brought in some oxygen tanks for them to use. The trailer, I didn't pull a clip of the trailer, but watching a trailer of a couple of clips of them during the recording process for this, it looks like Neil Young could be a real pain in the ass to work with, because because I mean, there were a couple of scenes that they had in that trailer where he was being a real tyrant. He was cursing and yelling and screaming at a guitar player, or I don't know who he was screaming at, but yelling at them because they weren't doing what he wanted them to do. And he actually said that in that interview with Conan O'Brien. He said, I don't know how anybody works with me. He said, when I'm focused and I'm working, I get crazy.
But yeah, I've read some of the stories about, how he interacted with Buffalo Springfield, and Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And I guess he was very, very difficult to get along with, very mercurial. And, what Dan said earlier about that, as I think Neil needs to be off by himself because he doesn't play well with others.
Right.
Yeah. Since you mentioned the documentary about the making of Colorado, has anybody ever seen Journey Through the Past, that movie that he made?
I never saw it.
I haven't either. He did a movie with Daryl Hannah called Paradox, and I tried watching it, and I abandoned it after a few minutes. It was just too weird for my taste.
No, the only Neil Young movie that I've seen, and he's actually he's made a handful. The only one I've seen was the concert film Live Rust, which is just really, really good. But he was actually the director on that. What's the pseudonym he uses? Bernard Shaky.
Oh yeah,
Bernard Shaky is a pseudonym. So yeah, if you go to IMDb and look up Bernard Shaky, there are like 4 or 5 films there that directed by Bernard Shaky. Well, Bernard Shaky is Neil Young.
Yeah, well, Paradox was some kind of a weird thing about featuring can't even talk, futuristic outlaws on the hunt for old technology, and it was directed by Daryl Hannah, and it was just weird.
No.
I couldn't get through it.
No, I've missed that one.
Yeah, and I've heard the soundtrack to Journey Through the Past, but I've never seen the movie or the film, so I'm just curious if either of you guys had ever seen it.
No.
He also did one called The Year of the Horse back in the mid or late 90s, which was, I don't know if it was a documentary or a concert film of Crazy Horse. I know that exists. I've never seen that one either. I think he also released an album called Year of the Horse. But anyway, shall we wrap it up?
And I think we beat this one to death.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. We've gone as far as we can. We've as far as we have with Neil and his craziness. Okay. Come back and see us next week. We're going to get off our schedule next week. Instead of Sunday, we're going to record on Monday next week, actually a week from tomorrow. And we're going to discuss the aforementioned Peter Jackson Get Back film. We're going to talk about the Beatles album Let It Be. We're also going to visit the reissue of Let It Be called Let It Be Naked. So you guys get ready for that one. And everybody get ready for that one. Come back and join us. Talk about it. Give us a like on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to us. Throw some comments down there. Let us know if there's something that you would like to listen to us discuss. And we'd be happy to talk with you about whatever album you'd like to listen about. So anyway, I'm Scott. There's Bob. There's Dan. Happy Sunday, everybody. We'll see you a week from tomorrow. So long.
Take care, everybody.